I'm about to tell you a story of one really, really epic sibling rivalry. And here they are. The younger sibling co-developed with Toyota, and the older sibling, the new WRX. Now I know these are two distinctively different cars. One's got 2 doors, is rear-wheel drive and NA. The other one, turbocharged all-wheel drive and has 4 doors. But I just keep seeing people online asking which one should they buy. So today I decided to test them head-to-head, and at the end, we'll even do a little roll race. So without further ado, let's get the most subjective thing out of the way first, styling. We'll start at the front of the younger sibling. Now, I can't lie, I absolutely love what they did with this car. I think they just really cleaned it up. I think the later facelift of the first generation was a bit too overstyled, too aggressive, because at the end of the day, this is a modders car, and if you want to make it more aggressive, well, you're gonna have a hard time because there are so many appearance mods for this thing out already. I mean, I'm pretty sure there's something like 4 different wide body kits. But overall here at the front, they did a nice job of kind of cleaning it up, simplifying. We have functional vents to each wheel well, cooling the brakes. And I see a little bit of some Porsche styling going on here. And the fact that the headlights start a bulge on the hood that goes all the way back seems to agree with me. Now at the rear end is where they really decided to kind of round things out. The last gen had a much more sharper looking bumper and taillight, and here they kind of decided to round the bumper out, went with the C-shaped taillight. Honestly, my main complaint back here has to be is that they use black piano plastic. You see, black piano plastic is more sensitive than everybody in my generation. You get dust on it and wash it off, scratches. You wipe it off with a microfiber, scratches. You look at it the wrong way and it scratches. Black piano plastic is one of those things that should live on the interior of the car, and now they used it here and on the new 22 WRX. But besides that, I love the teeny tiny little arrow pieces on the edges of the headlights and the little spats on the rear wheel arch. I think overall it looks pretty dang good. And since I'm gonna have to talk about the older siblings' fenders, because I mean, how could you not? We'll have to talk about the younger siblings as well. And man, right off the bat, I gotta say, these start at around $29,000, and you get actual working aero that also looks good. It's kind of mind-blowing to me. So as I mentioned, on the front bumper, the air vents are functional, put air in, cool the brakes, and then this vents the wheel well so too much air pressure doesn't build up here. I mean, what else can I say? Awesome to see. You guys ready to hate me? I like the new WRX. I don't love it, but I do really like how it looks. I was probably like a lot of you. I saw it in press release photos and I thought this has got to be a really bad April Fool's joke. Except, well, it was nowhere near April. And then we got one and I got to see it in person and it immediately started growing on me. And my favorite part by far has to be the front. The hood scoop got so much more wider. I love the way it blends into the hood. The headlights got a lot more smaller, but I love this little 2 jagged design. The center grille bulges out more than anything else, and the center line is carried all the way through the bumper and disappears into the taillight. I think the front is the only place that I wouldn't paint match on this car because I think it looks great as is. And besides, if you paint match this and then you get rock chips, you know, you have to touch up the paint or get it resprayed, versus if a rock hits this plastic, you hit it with a heat gun and it's pretty much gone. All right, we're at the rear. My least favorite part of this car. I don't know why, but this whole back plastic section just isn't really growing on me. Now, I do think they look pretty dang good paint matched, but I still can't wait to see some aftermarket rear bumper offerings. Now, this is also guilty of the same thing of the BRZ as I mentioned, and we have a whole lot of black piano plastic that, like I said, is just one of the most fragile things in the world. All right, the plastic fenders. Now look, honestly, me personally, I don't really mind them that much. I do think in some colors they just do not work, but in white, in the gray, or in the black, I think they blend in just fine. And as you can see, they do a really good job of catching sand, dirt, and salt so it doesn't get on your paint. Now also, I really love this rear fender. It is super aggressive, and as it keeps going back, it just looks like it really bulges out from the rest of the body of the car. Now before we move on from styling, I briefly want to touch on the controversies on both of these cars. And I think honestly, a lot of the outrage over these cars just stems from Neophobia, or those of you unfamiliar with that, Call of Duty syndrome. Now, I'll explain it by giving you some examples. 2008, new generation of WRX STI comes out, and people spot the hatchback, and immediately there's just a huge outrage from fanboys going, "Why did you make a hatchback? It's so not traditional, like, this is not what you're supposed to be making, it should just be a sedan." Okay, maybe understandable, right? But then 2015 rolls around, the VEA generation comes out, and there's no hatchback. And immediately, "Where is the hatchback? Why didn't you make a hatchback? The hatchback was like the best thing since sliced bread." See what I'm talking about now? No matter how much somebody nails something, people are still gonna bash it because it's new and because it's different. And I highly suggest you don't become one of those people, because the only thing that's constant in life is change. All right, inside the new BRZ now. Man, honestly, for the driver, this is a very nice place to be. Steering wheel's nice. It is a bit skinny for my taste and not flat bottom either, but not the biggest problem. Everything is laid out where it should be, just makes sense. The climate controls have this kind of like a Lamborghini-esque look to them. The screen is so much better than what came in the first generation, but I mean, those were terrible, so still by today's standards, the screen is pretty mediocre. I'm glad that they still kept some buttons on it for ease of use and whatnot. Then, you know, you get your 2 cup holders, 2 USB chargers, aux port, fully defeatable traction control. Also has a track mode that kind of changes your gauge up front to a non-linear gauge, so you can really watch your RPMs. And also, digital gauge cluster. Was not expecting that in this car, honestly. I was expecting an analog one, being that it's a, you know, quote-unquote driver's car. Okay, now for shits and giggles, I'm gonna try and get into the back seat. Come on, skinnier than earthworm. Ugh. Okay, I guess if you're 6'2", you're just gonna kind of have to rest your feet on the driver. Yeah, this is terrible. I mean, maybe if you amputated me from the knees down, I'd be fine, but otherwise, these seats just make for great and easy weight reduction. All right, inside the new WRX now, and I gotta tell you guys right off the bat, this is a nice place to be in, not just for the driver, but for the passengers as well. Now, steering wheel is super nice, the indents for the thumbs are just right, in my opinion, nice flat bottom, and of course, red stitching never hurts. Seats are a bit more comfier than the BRZ, still got pretty decent side bolstering though, that's not a problem at all. Analog gauge cluster, and now when I think about it, I feel like this car should have gotten the digital cluster, whereas the BRZ should have kept the analog, because I feel like this is more of a revolution of the WRX, whereas the BRZ is just an evolution of itself. But maybe with this big, huge touchscreen, it would have just been a little bit too much. Speaking of which, big, huge touchscreen. Now, by modern standards, not like the most responsive, the greatest one of them all, like when you're comparing to like German luxury brands or something like that. I do like that they kept like some of the climate control buttons on here for ease of use. I really wish I could like slide the fan speed around instead of having to tap it, but I guess I'm just nitpicking at points. And this is the same exact touchscreen that lives in the newest generation of Outback. And if you ask any of those Outback owners, they can be a tad problematic sometimes. I don't really think we've had many issues with ours. I think I just had to turn the car off and on a few times, but besides that, overall, I say it's pretty good. But yeah, overall, obviously, more space in here than the BRZ. Let's sit in the back and I'll show you guys for comparison. All right, in the back of the new WRX now. First things first, still have decent knee room. If I lean all the way back, then I can just barely fit my fingers in between the head and the ceiling, which means on bumps, my head is going straight into the roof. One thing I found kind of peculiar back here is the fact that the back of the driver's seat doesn't have a pocket, but the passenger seat does. Kind of odd to me. For the kids, you get two 2.1 amp USB chargers back here. And in the limited trim, you also get rear heated seats, which is very nice. Another thing I found peculiar is that the JDM model actually has climate control vents back here, and the US model doesn't, which I think is kind of odd, since I feel like they marketed this car a bit more at the mature crowd that probably has kids that would probably complain that it's cold back here on their drive to school. But yeah, overall, obviously, just blows the BRZ rear seats out of the park. No surprise there. All right, and with that stuff out of the way, let's take these cars out on the road and see how they compare when it comes to driving. All right, we're behind the wheel of the new BRZ, and first thing I have to mention is that really annoying torque dip is finally gone. For those of you that don't know, the first gen suffered from a really bad torque dip around 3,500 RPM that owners just had to learn how to drive around. It made it so much more annoying and harder to drive around the city, and also made it more annoying to drive on the limit, as you had to always be consciously trying to avoid that torque dip. But in this car, if you pull up the torque graph, you'll notice that it still may be a little bit there, but it's pretty much gone. If they didn't show you this graph, I'm guessing your butt dyno would probably never notice it. Now overall, I noticed they also made the damping a little bit softer in this, which for around town is really nice, but this is honestly not really your city car. This is your back road carver, your canyon crusher, and your track day little monster. The clutch is really light in this. I really don't know how to feel about that. Coupled with like a little slight rev hang when you first push the clutch in, I think it makes it a little bit awkward to drive smoothly around the city. The steering though, I was pleasantly surprised with. When I heard that this was going to come with electronic power steering, I was really upset, as, you know, VA steering wheel is absolutely dead, horrendous, like doesn't tell you anything. But this somehow still does. You can still feel little bumps, textures, understeer all through the steering wheel. And in general, you can really feel what the whole car is doing at all times. This is, you know, kind of an awkward car to drive around the city, but so easy to drive on the limit, it's insane. A little fun fact, this exact car that I'm driving right now is the first rear-wheel drive car that I've ever driven. So at first driving it, I was really walking on eggshells around corners and things like that, scared to oversteer. But once I finally worked up the courage to carve up a canyon with it, my God, it just became so easy. It's like second nature in this car to drive it on the limit. It is so communicative, like you know when you're about to get in trouble and to stop. It's just, I can't even put it into words. This thing is so much fun to drive when you're out of the city. Now in the city, like I said, a little bit awkward. And does it feel quicker than the first generation? Absolutely. Traction control. Yeah, there's definitely some more rev hang in this than in the 22 WRX. I mean, you guys probably heard from that. Clutch slipping to get the revs down. But overall, besides that, this thing, absolute blast to drive. All right, we're in the 2022 WRX, and first thing I can tell you about this thing is, man, it is just so much easier to jump into and drive than the BRZ. Let me explain. first things first, the power curve is super nice and flat. You know, pretty much all of the RPM gauge is absolutely usable, which just makes it so much less of a hassle to get going. We do have the STI short throw shifter in here, but overall, I'm not a big fan of the shift feel. I kind of feel like when you're going into gear, it kind of feels like rubbing two pieces of rubber together. Not the greatest there. Clutch pedal's a bit heavier, which makes it nicer, and there's absolutely zero rev hang. So as you're about to see, you can shift quick, yet still shift really smooth, something that is not possible in the BRZ. It's kind of crazy how these things go back to back, blow for blow in the city driving and, you know, fun driving categories. It's really a mixed bag between these two. But overall, I'd say this feels a lot more at home in the city, and the BRZ feels a lot more at home in the canyons. Now, my biggest issue with the driving experience in this thing has to be the steering. Don't get me wrong, the steering rack is really sharp, precise, direct, and fast. And the changes they made to this car, the front end feels really nimble and responsive, especially for a car with this weight and size. But it really, really understeers bad. Essentially, they tilted the roll pitch forward, which makes the front end more expensive. They tilted the roll pitch forward, which makes the front end more responsive, but also encourages understeer. Whereas the VA, with of course a bit of persuasion, you could get it to get a little sideways in the corner. This, so far, I haven't been able to. It just squeals the front tires, which, by the way, that hits you completely by surprise, because again, my main problem with this car is the steering feel. It is super numb. It doesn't tell you anything. It's like that girlfriend that looks visibly bugged and you ask them, hey, is everything okay? And they just explode on you with, it's fine, everything's fine, why would it not be fine? And you just feel like, whoa, where did that come from? So when you overcook a corner in this thing and you hear your front wheels start squealing, you're also left feeling the same way. Where did that come from? I mean, occasionally on like a big pothole, you'll feel it through the steering wheel, but you'll feel it through your butt something like 6 times harder because, yeah, the frame is so stiff now, which is great for driving feel, but bad for daily driving. So on the highway, this thing is really not great. The NVH is pretty bad. That would be noise, vibration, and harshness. On something like a concrete surface, the whole car just vibrates, and then if you throw a cap back on it, be prepared for a lot of drone. I was actually really surprised. I think the BRZ sounds better than this, which I never thought I'd say in a million years, right? But it just does. The BRZ somehow just has a deeper and overall more clear tone to it, whereas this car really is quite a bit drony. Now, I feel like maybe with a J-pipe, this thing would get a little bit more angry, but also it's not a terrible sounding car. It's all right. Now, another strange thing is 6,000 RPM redline, which was really weird, especially because Subaru was bragging about putting better valve springs in this thing, which you want better valve springs for, you know, higher RPM applications, yet they turn around and drop the rev limit. Really strange. So far, people who've tuned the car, though, find that this car loves more RPM. I think some people are running as high as 6,500, and I think some people are searching for that 7,000, which I wouldn't mind at all, but a low RPM redline really makes it good for longevity. Probably burns less oil, too. So, to sum the WRX up, much more easier to drive than the BRZ, not as fun, and in some places around town, not as comfortable as the BRZ, which also I was not expecting. Alright, so just to sum up my driving impressions, the older sibling, being more mature, is just easier to jump into and drive around town. Very compliant, zero rev hang. I mean, really, really smooth linear power. And then the younger sibling is a lot more fun. It's just steering is really good. It's very communicative. The whole body of the car, you really know what's going on with the whole car when you're driving this thing on the limit. So, but then also they trade a few blows in the respective categories where they're, you know, quote unquote better. The BRZ in some places around town feels a lot more comfortable and takes bumps better than the WRX, but then the WRX seems to have a much more stiffer frame, which also lets you feel the road in some ways better. So it really is kind of a true sibling rivalry between these two as they trade blows in both the fun department and the comfortable department. But anyways, now let's take these two out and have ourselves a little roll race. All right, so we are heading over to Mexico. By we, I have AJ, our data guy, sitting in the new BRZ. He's a first-gen owner, so should feel right at home in it. Some disclaimers I gotta quickly make. This has an ETS cap back. The BRZ has an MBRP axle back. Shouldn't really be an issue. This does, however, have a Cobb access port, but for this drag race, I flashed it back to stage 0, so should be relatively stock to stock comparison. What we're gonna do is just basically a 20 roll to just eliminate human error from launches and things like that. And yeah, we'll just kind of see. I'm really curious as this has about 30 more horsepower and that weighs about 400 or 500 pounds less. So we'll see if that lower weight can make up for the lack of horsepower. An hour. Oh, we're taking them. We took them. All right. That is so much closer than I was actually expecting. It's insane. I honestly thought as soon as the turbo spools up, like this thing will just blow it out of the water, but that BRZ can keep up.
That was pretty good.
Yeah, I got you by a little bit.
Yeah, just do one more in the rough hose.
Yeah, f it, why not? Takes off again. Gaining on him. Got him. But he's still keeping up. He stopped right there, I think. That's so crazy to me. Really is. Just goes to show that at the end of the day, weight matters just as much as power. But it's a shame because so many automakers have forgotten that weight is the enemy of performance, you know? They just keep pumping out these cars with crazy amounts of horsepower, but then they weigh like 34, 35, 36, some like almost 4,000 pounds, you know, if you look at like the Audi RS7 and whatnot, which I get it. That's not really supposed to be a performance car. It's more supposed to be just like a luxury sedan that can boogie when you wanted to, but yeah, it is kind of a shame the fact that most automakers just kind of gave up on reducing weight and focus solely on power when it comes to performance. Wow, what a roll race. I really gotta hand it to the BRZ on this one. I've driven both cars so many times and I thought the WRX was absolutely just gonna blow it out of the water, but honestly, even when the turbo hit full boost, you guys saw I was just barely inching towards the BRZ. So really gotta hand it to Subaru. They took the lessons that they've learned from the FA20 in the first generation and really rolled everything into this FA24. Like I talked about on the drive, they really ironed out that torque dip, so you no longer have to drive around it. It makes it so much more easier to drive, and it makes it so much more funner to drive. But overall, I think both these cars pull relatively well. Now, of course, if we flash the stage 1 map on this, it would just absolutely rip this thing to pieces. That just goes to show that when your car already comes with a turbo, it is really, really easy to make more power, and that's especially true with this new FA24 engine. I mean, Cobb custom tuning just came out like a week ago for these things, and people are making like over 400 wheel torque with just simple bolt-ons. For a Subaru, let's be honest, that is unheard of. And with that being concluded, that also concludes our review. And in case you guys are curious which car I would choose, well, I would go for the BRZ. I'm 24, I don't have any kids, and I don't have plans to have kids anytime soon, but that's not the main reason why I would choose this car. I would choose this car because of the way it makes me feel when I'm driving it. I mean, it's so confidence inspiring, it's so easy to drive on the limit, but most of all, it's so much fun to drive it on the limit. You can just make this car do things that you want it to do, whereas this, no matter how hard you try, is just gonna squeal the front tires. Now, don't get me wrong, both are great cars, and you know, maybe if I do end up with kids in the near future, I actually would pick one of these up. But you gotta remember, I'm a real big driving feel person. That's exactly why I paid $18,000 for a 30-year-old Toyota MR2, just because that thing is so much fun to drive. I love the way it makes me feel, and this car kind of reminds me of it, but obviously being modern, it's a lot more refined and a lot less scary to drive on the limit, which doesn't necessarily make it that much less fun for me. But yeah, that will do it, guys. Let me know in the comments which car you would choose and why, or which car you have already chosen and why. I'll be very interested to see what you guys think. And for the first couple of days, I'll be watching the comments closely as well. I'll be home for Christmas, and I'd love to have some conversations with you guys about these two in the comments. As always, thank you so much for tuning in, guys. I wish you and your family a very warm and happy holiday season. And, you know, if you enjoyed today's video, consider subscribing. As always, love all of you, and I'll see you guys in the next one.